I argued with myself as to whether or not I should even respond to it. Everybody is just trying to say controversial things to get traffic on social media.
But the problem now is that when you're 20 years old and you post something online, it just stays on forever.
I just tell my children, please assume that anything that you put online will be there forever. And can you imagine being at a job interview in the mid-20s and they slide something across the table and say, hey, is this you?
In today's episode, we have the honor of hosting Andy Stumpf, a man whose life story reads like an action-packed novel. Andy's ambition to become a Navy SEAL was set in stone from the age of 11. Andy not only graduated from BUD/S, but went on to join SEAL Team 5, and later, the most elite counterterrorism unit in the military, SEAL Team 6.
Today, Andy leverages his extraordinary experiences and provides invaluable conversations on his podcast, the Cleared Hot Podcast.
So the military, I really think, needs to change their messaging with their audience.
We noticed that you've expressed skepticism about the current political system.
I think it's toxic. I really think that, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you really want to lead by example. Maybe the wisest thing is to realize you're not that wise.
The Avenue of the Strongest is a podcast dedicated to exploring the lives and experiences of the most inspiring individuals from around the world. Each episode features interviews with fascinating guests who share their insights and wisdom on a variety of topics, including education, impact, motivation, health, and learning. Here are your hosts, Anayet Chowdhury and Vlad Suleiman.
This podcast is sponsored by Argo Prep, an award-winning edtech company serving over 1 million students nationwide. We understand that as parents, you want to ensure that your child receives the best education possible. Say hello to Argo Prep. With over 15 plus educational awards earned in just the past year, Argo Prep's platform offers your child video lessons, quizzes, drills, printable worksheets, and more. Best of all, your Argo Prep subscription comes included with 4 comprehensive digital workbooks that cover all 4 subjects: math, ELA, science, and social studies. Visit argoprep.com today and start your free trial. Andy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd love to start our conversation with a video you put out recently discussing a viral video clip where a few individuals were discussing who's more toxic, somebody in prison or someone in the military. Now, we're going to go ahead and play the clip for everyone else to see, but the video goes on, of course, to state that someone in the military is indeed more toxic compared to someone who is in prison.
More toxic, a guy in prison or a guy in the army?
Oh, a guy in the army.
A guy in the army.
100%.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, because in prison, at least they find religion.
They find relationships and they get married in prison. They're they value you more because they know what it's like to be around no women.
Now, we're not going to get into this whole entire topic over here, but I think we can both agree that that specific video clip is ridiculous. But instead of bashing the video, I watched your entire video. I think it's fantastic. We'll put a link down below. I specifically enjoyed your response. You actually carefully dissected the clip and laid out some important points, which makes room for thoughtful conversation. So my question to you is, how do we get here in the first place? Is there a growing misconception about military service today for our younger people? Because for somebody like me, and so I'm a millennial, that would never cross my mind. In fact, it's pretty absurd. So my question is, what exactly is going on here? How do we get to that point?
I mean, I think that's a complex question, and I don't know if you could point to one thing or 15 things. The military, I can talk only about my own military experience. I don't speak for the military. I need to be very clear about that. My opinions and the things that I say, I'm only referencing, and I try to be very clear about things I saw with my own eyes, things I experienced with my own interaction with the military, but I certainly do not speak for the military in general. The military has that video. I argued with myself as to whether or not I should even respond to it. And the reason that I felt that it deserved a response is that absent a response, people would either ignore or, in the worst case, listen to what those women were saying. And I don't know the women, Nothing against the women. I remember being that age and talking at a very educated perspective about things that I didn't know anything about, because I'm pretty sure they have no experience with the military and also no experience with prison. And that's okay.
Right.
You know, you can have an opinion on those things, but maybe be upfront and clear about that. So I felt it deserved a response. And it would be easy to point and say, you know, this is millennials don't know how to think for themselves, or everybody is just trying to say controversial things to get traffic on social media. What we need to do is we need to create a video, whether it's ridiculous or not, with the goal of becoming viral. You're not trying to entertain. Well, actually, you would be. I was going to say, you're not trying to educate. You're trying to entertain. And more than anything, you're trying to get eyeballs on yourself or your platform. And that's a real thing. But my experience in the military was formative in my life. You know, I knew I wanted to join since I was 11. I actually enlisted in the military when I was a junior in high school. I had to wait until I graduated and became 18 to pursue the career that I wanted. I was in the military in the very formative years of being a young man, and it has shaped how I think about myself, how I view the world, the amount of travel that I have been able to do. I'm on my third passport at this point, and that's after military service. The military does not do a very good job of presenting an image of what that occupation can provide. You know, I don't think that most people post 9/11, now we're over 20 years away from 9/11. In the days and weeks and months and a few years afterwards, it was standing room only in recruiting offices. People knew what they were signing up for. They wanted to fight not an existential threat, but a threat that was directly in front of our face. And in those moments, you could say those people were definitely looking to serve something greater than themselves. But there's a lot more to the military than just that type of service. For people who joined before myself, I was joined in 1996. My father served in the military, but post-Vietnam, pre-9/11, so many people looked at military service as a way to depart their socioeconomic status. They wanted the GI Bill. They wanted to learn a trade. They wanted to escape the environment that they grew up in. I mean, I served with countless people, and we didn't spend a lot of time, and I actually regret this. I never spent a significant amount of time talking to people about their reasons for joining and the environment that they came from. But in the conversations I did have, I talked with people who had abusive parents. They had alcoholic parents. They grew up in just abject poverty, and they didn't know what else to do. And they turned to the military as an option. And I think it is a great option for those things, in addition to the service. And if you do want to serve something greater than yourself, and that's all kind of wrapped in, because you can do all of that under the same banner. The military, I mean, you can just go to the commercials that they put out. It's all warfare facing, which that is the role of the military. Let's be very clear. They execute the foreign policy of the United States of America. And for a small portion of people in the military, your job may involve direct combat. A lot of people don't realize that most roles in the military, about 85% of them, are not designed to actually be on a battlefield. They're from an intelligence perspective, or a support perspective, a logistic perspective, all of the things that allow direct combat forces to be able to do their job. But all of the recruiting is based around those things. So the military, I really think, needs to change their messaging with their audience. Their audience right now is of the age and demographic of those women. And that is what got me to a place where I determined I should at least say something. And people can ignore me if they want to. I have no problem with that. But their opinions, however comical, which at the end of the day, that's kind of how I viewed it, I think that they deserved a response. So the military needs to own a portion of how we got to the place of where they could talk about it from that perspective. We also, at a strategic level, and our government need to look at how we use our military and the ways that we use our military throughout the world. And it's, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, if you look at them with the lens of having some distance, it's very easy to heavily criticize the actions that our country took. And that should be acknowledged, it should be discussed, and it should change our policy going forward, and we should be transparent about that. And I think that would help recover a lot of the feelings that some people have about either the lack of integrity in the military or what they even think the military actually does. So I just wanted to provide a counterpoint to I think the video itself was maybe 60 seconds, the one that they put up. But I think we've all seen examples of 60-second videos that can change the social lexicon and they can grab people's attention because that's what they're designed to do. And I just felt that it deserved a response.
Hey there, before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to stop for just a brief moment and express our heartfelt gratitude.
Knowing that you've chosen to spend your time with us, to listen and engage with our content truly warms our hearts.
Every story we share, every topic we discuss is made much more meaningful if you are here with us on this journey.
If you found value in what you've heard so far and you're excited as we are about the episodes to come, we'd be so honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. It not only ensures you stay informed of all of our new content, but it also supports us in continuing to create and share. From all of us here, a sincere thank you.
Now, without further ado, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, no, I agree. What a great point. Vlad, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was 100% created just to get the traffic to their channel or their social media, whatever. And they have no clue how it would affect everyone else. Understand that the intention of creating this video was just to create the traffic, but everybody else taking all other millennials and young generation just taking everything serious. And they start to discuss it internally. And oh yes, maybe this and. I would say they should discuss if this kind of discussion is toxic or not, rather than what they discussed.
Well, or the platforms that they're putting these pieces of media on. I mean, or is it toxic that now as humans, we have more access to information than I think our brain has evolved yet to the point that we can actually process? Is it affecting our attention span? Is it affecting our interpersonal communication skills? To me, the interesting conversation is the toxicity of that ecosystem, let alone the individual topics that may come up on it.
Right. And I just wanted to add something into that point. I mean, it's a really good point where content creators now have to really think about engagement and virality. We've really shifted from education. And Vlad, we've done the same thing. We're an education company. We've always been about educating. But when it comes to the marketing side of things, we've had plenty of conversation about the virality, but even I can admit that we've thought about quote unquote misleading for the first 2-3 seconds to capture that attention. But it's just crazy because now you get into an era where if someone is just watching that video for the first 10 seconds, all they know is misinformation. They don't capture the full thing, and now they go on and tell somebody else, and now you have this entire ecosystem of lies and misinformation and things like that. So it's certainly an interesting in a discussion to be had. I was going to ask my follow-up question to that, which I think you did a great job already answering, but I will point out just a couple of days ago, Army Major General Johnny Davis, the commanding general of the Army Recruiting Command, stated it was one of the toughest recruiting landscape he's seen in over 33 years of service at a committee hearing. Recruitment is a challenge. And I was going to ask you, what strategies do you think that could be effective in improving military recruitment? You did already kind of point that out. I don't know if you wanted to include anything else here to this question.
Again, that's a complex question because I don't think that situations like a difficult recruiting environment occur overnight. I think you have to take a look at longer term trends. And even I have a 20-year-old son, an 18-year-old son, and a 15-year-old daughter. So I have some good touch points with the younger generation. I don't even know what letter or name would be association with what generation, whatever generation they are. My kids' generation. I have heard their friends, it's different. And I'm not going to put a label on right or wrong. I have my own personal thoughts on it. But when we start talking about as a country and how we educate our kids, and we talk about our own history as a country, and there are legitimate groups of people arguing for the United States of America to be taught to younger generations that we are a country of oppressors. We are a country of people that has just tried to shape the world through our lens. And we have this horrible history of decisions and choices, which we have a horrible history of some decisions and choices. I don't think those should ever not be acknowledged, but I think you have to look at it in its totality. Slavery is a great example. Probably one of the worst stains on the United States of America that we ever allowed a system like that to ever be in place. And I challenge people when they bring that up, talking about the faults of the United States, to point me towards another country on planet Earth that doesn't have, to some degree in history, their foundation built upon things that were either directly associated with slavery or just slavery in and of itself. And it's impossible to do so. Unfortunately, it is the history of humanity. What I can say is we went to war as a country to end it. And we ended it quickly, and we haven't allowed it to occur since then. We also made some really other stupid decisions, like not allowing women to vote. That one didn't age very well. You know, the fact that they had to do what they did to get their equal rights, like, come on, people. Was there something in the water back then that you really thought that, you know, women didn't have the ability to think appropriately? Like, I get, but also don't sweep those under the rug. Let's pull that out onto the table and let's put a magnifying glass on that and try to understand why it happened, what we did, and how we can become better for it. If we do that, I think that's healthy. But if you only tell one side of that story and almost everything is viewed negatively, and we're looking for reasons to view this country as, again, those oppressors or the poor decisions that we have made, why would somebody want to wear the flag of their country when they're being taught that their country is not worthy of wearing that flag?
Right.
And that doesn't happen overnight. That's going to be a generational thing. And again, there's the portion of the storytelling that it comes from the military, and it's their responsibility to educate people on what they do, the pros and the cons, and the things that can come from it. So it's hard to say why that environment exists, but it does. And so we need to figure out why, which I am not smart enough to do that. I have suspicions along kind of what I just unpacked a little bit. And it's going to take a while. And unfortunately, well, my worry, not unfortunately, but my concern is that, so for the past 10 years, Army has missed its recruiting goals by about 25%. This last year, I believe only the Marine Corps and the Space Force met their recruiting goals. For clarity, I have absolutely no idea what Space Force does. I want to know. I would love to be a door gunner on the space shuttle if they're recruiting for people. I think that'd be amazing. But every other branch missed their recruiting goals. And with missing recruiting goals, you can think about the manning, and it starts cascading down if these things continue over a certain period of time. You can find yourself at a place where the U.S. military is no longer the most dominant military force on the face of the planet. And then we might find ourselves in a place where we need it to be, and it can't be. And you just cannot mass produce that level of experience and competence. And I hope it doesn't get to that point. But that also may be what it takes, another emergency or a crisis or national issue that gets people to line back up again to fix those numbers. I hope it doesn't get to that. I hope that we can do a better job of maybe just explaining to people how, who we are as a nation and how we should think of ourselves. I'm not conspiratorial. I try not to be, but I listen with my ears, and I have 2 ears and 2 eyes, and I try to use them in that ratio to my mouth. And I do hear people phrasing thoughts about this country and want to change the educational system about this country. And that might be short-term rewarding for them, but I think long-term as a country, it's very insidious and very dangerous.
Right.
And how do you think we can adapt this message towards the younger generation so they are more leaned towards going and enrolling themselves?
I don't think we should ever change a message to try to get more people to enlist in the military. It is a difficult job. It has requirements that are abnormal in the civilian job sector. But I think what we should do is allow people to have discussions as opposed to telling them what they should think. One of my favorite quotes is from Sebastian Junger, and he says, the role of the press is not to tell people what to think, it's to tell them what to think about. And you can apply that to almost everything. As opposed, there are some things that I think as far as curriculum, like math, 1 + 1, the last time I've checked, and every time I've checked before that, is actually 2. Gravity. I'm an avid skydiver. I'm an enthusiast of gravity. It works so far every time that I've tested it. Now, there are some things it's like, all right, that one's kind of off the table for debate. But instead of telling people what they should think, how about we provide them the opportunity, information that they can make up their own mind? And that way you're not just channeling people towards a particular direction that might have long-term unintended consequences.
No, I like the point that you said that military is not all about going to the battlefield. I think this is very nice and big point. And it's not really discussed out there. And I think through the social media, it can be affected as well. like through the podcast, like yourself, like maybe some other guys can discuss what it is really to be in the military, not on a battlefield, but what other things can be done and how they can be
Right, because
really
you're picking up incredible trade
right.
skills, right?
100%. Yeah.
There is so much to be gained from the military. You know, people ask me all the time about their thinking about their potential journey into the military, and I always tell them the same thing. You know, you are living in a time right now with technological advantages that I didn't have when I was looking at enlisting. I was like second and third and fourth and fifth hand information from, oh, this guy knows a guy who was a guy who did a thing 20 years ago. I mean, with our little anxiety rectangles that we all carry around, you have access to unlimited information. So really educate yourself about any potential opportunity that you might want to pursue in the military. You'd be shocked by some of the occupations that are possible to pursue. What I always tell people is if you choose to enlist, just be aware the military is going to get their pound of flesh up front. You're going to sign for, you know, a contracted amount of time. You can go online and look at the pay scale. You can see exactly what you're going to make on there. You can look up special pays or occupational pay. So you get a really good idea from an economic perspective of what it's going to look like. Be aware of the fact that you're going to surrender some of your constitutional rights. You're not allowed to wear a military uniform and go to a political event and sit there and speak publicly in that uniform. And, you know, and that is a reduction in your First Amendment right, but that comes with, you know, the price and the cost of signing on the military service. And I always just tell people they're going to get their pound of flesh up front. Make sure you get your pound of flesh as well. And that means every educational opportunity program possible, vocational skills, educational skills. I mean, that I saw people who would get, there was programs on military installations that had aircraft there. They had flying programs. They had mechanical programs. They had after school care. They had preschool care. They have, you know, there's just so many opportunities. And I have found that a lot of people who join the military, they don't really take the time to research those things. And if you get out before you research them, it can oftentimes be too late. So just know what you're getting into and make sure that you get out of it what you want to as well.
That's great advice. Andy, I have something to share. Let me share my screen over here. Let me know once it pops over to your screen. Let me know if you can see that.
Yes, that would be me.
So this is a post you posted 7 years ago, so over 7 years ago. I'm just going to read the caption just for fun here. I cannot believe I'm posting this ridiculous picture. Nearly 20 years ago, all I see is a dumbass punk kid who thought he knew what was up. At least I have a few more years under my belt. Jury is out as to whether or not anything else has changed. So in this post, you joked about the jury still being out on whether anything else has changed since your younger days. My question to you then is, what's the verdict that you've reached now since that post? You posted that 7 years ago. What are your thoughts now? How have you changed over the last 7 years?
I think I'm just more aware of how much I don't know. You know, another great quote, youth is wasted on the young. And, you know, you just, you think you know everything. And it's I brought it up in, you know, in discussing the video with those three women. Like I said, I remember being that age.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that I had the answers to everything, and that's okay. I actually don't think there's a way that you can short circuit that. You have to go through youth, and hopefully, and I say this as a parent, watching my children stumble their way through youth, regardless of how many controls or safety networks I try to put in place. I think the hope is that you come out the other side still alive and you haven't made some horrendous life choices that are going to follow you for the rest of your life. And I just turned 46 this year. There are only a few topics that I can speak on with any level of expertise. And I just think at this point in my life, I am more aware of that. And so I try to be much more cautious with how I present myself. And I just try to be clear, like, this is my experience. This is what my experiences has been. And I am totally open to other people having the same experience, diametrically opposed experiences, and everything in between. So I'm still a punk ass kid at the end of the day. I don't understand how I'm 46 years old. I don't feel 46 years old. I don't know how I got to this place. It certainly wasn't some grandiose plan that I followed step by step by step. And the older I get, you know, the older and wiser you are, I realize, well, maybe the wisest thing is to realize you're not that wise.
Yeah, no, those are great words. And I know you agree on this fact, but so do Vlad and I. I'm very thankful that we grew up in an age where the internet wasn't out there as it is now. So I said we all did really stupid things as 20 years old when we were 20 or 18 or 22. But the problem now is that when you're 20 years old and you post something online, it just stays on forever. Right? And that's the problem. Like, it's not that these individuals who made the video are problematic. We all did really silly things, except we don't have that backlog of data where it yeah, exactly. We don't have that proof. It doesn't haunt us for the rest of our lives. But anything you put out online, it's scary because it'll follow you. It'll follow you for the rest of your life.
I had to have this conversation with my children. You know, they grew up in a much more digital age, and I just always reinforce to them, please just remember and assume that anything that you post ever, to include text messaging other people, you know, I know a lot of these social media apps have a disappearing feature. It creates this environment where people think they can say things and it won't be remembered, but it's being remembered somewhere by a machine that's keeping a record of it. I just tell my children, please assume that anything that you put online will be there forever. And can you imagine being at a job interview in your mid-20s and they slide something across the table and say, hey, is this you? Was this your username? Because I can think back, I am thankful the internet was not around. I did some galactically stupid things in my youth. And to this day, at 46, I can remember some things that I said when I was young, when I was in high school. And it was so stupid and it was so mean. And it still haunts me to this day that I said those things. Fortunately, probably the only people who are even aware that happened would be myself and those directly involved in that conversation. I can't even fathom what that would be like to have it captured in 4K with crystal clear audio and have it live forever. Like you guys said, it is an environment that is not the one that I grew up in, and I am thankful for that.
Yeah.
But what if we look at it in another angle? Because everything is stored right now. At least you can,
remember in 4K quality.
4K, remember, look at it yourself, analyze what stupid shit you did, maybe even showcase it to your kids and them whatnot.
But the internet is never forgiving, and that's the problem.
I was just going to say, one, that would require people to take the time to be reflective, and that is tough. We live in an environment where it's not about looking inward, it's about shouting outward. Look at the social media platforms. And I exist on the social media platforms, or some of them, because of the podcast or just the things that I do occupationally. But I'm very cautious with how I interact, and I'm cautious with what I put up. And the way that I view social media, it's just people look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah.
Look at my curated feed. Look at the picture that I choose to put up and the way that I choose to present it and with the filters that I choose to put on it. And it's mostly people at peaks. There's not a lot of people in valleys on social media. And so it becomes a very, like, just look at me, look at me, look at me. And you spend all of your time on this outward expression and not a lot of time on the inward expression. And the FOMO is real. I see it in my own kids. They're worried about missing one of their friends' posts. If you asked them, they'd probably tell you, I don't have time to review the mistakes that I have made because I need to look at what everybody else has got going on. I need to be doing that or thinking about that. And then, the most powerful thing you can probably do would be to sit with your mistakes and understand them and try to figure out what caused them and to learn from that. But that takes time. And it also, I think that takes a little bit of age as well. I don't think I was capable of objectively doing that earlier in my life. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it now, but I think my processing ability has at least improved.
The big thing, at least we all realize that we did stupid shit. Now we regret. Now we realize it. But the big would be if somebody would do something wrong, and still in 50 years they would say, "Yeah, it's okay. I did what I did." I don't disagree with myself. This is horrifying. Andy, I would like to ask you, how was the transition from the active duty to the civilian life for you?
It wasn't that bad. I had started double dipping on the weekends and working for a strength and conditioning company for a few years before I had gotten out of the military. So I had a good idea, at least from an economic perspective, how I was going to support my family at the time. I didn't, metaphorically or physically hang up one uniform and have to put on a suit and tie by any stretch of the imagination. So there was a little bit of a burden relief associated with that. And I always told myself and reminded myself that what I did in the military, it was just a job. It's not who I am. It's what I did. And let's respect it as that and not try to derive too much of my identity from it. So that way it's not as hard for me to move on to whatever's next.
But for a lot of people, it is actually very horrible experience when they're active duty and become civilians. So
it can be.
Why is that? Why is that? And what would you recommend to this kind of people how to adapt to the new life?
I mean, my first piece of advice would be give yourself ample runway. It's if you don't start thinking about what's going to be next until you're 2 weeks from getting out of the military. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying you're probably a little bit behind the power curve, and you should expect the transition to be a little bit more jarring. When you sign your contract and every time you re-enlist, there is a date on that piece of paper that, shocker, reflects exactly the date you will leave the military. So nobody can say, unless they get kicked out for a reason that is likely their own doing, they can't say, well, I didn't know I was going to get out today. Yes, you did, because it was clearly on this piece of paper that you signed. So give yourself some runway. And start working on it before it becomes what you would consider to be a crisis or an emergency. I also advocate for people to have social circles outside of their military peers. The community of people that I worked with was very insular. And I'm not saying this negatively because it was some of the closest friends that I've ever had. But if all of your friends and all of your social circle and all of your network exist from an occupation that you are leaving, it's going to be tough. You're going to lose your sense of identity. You're going to lose your sense of connection, your sense of tribe, that camaraderie, and you're going to have to find that somewhere else. Having a social circle that's outside of that is not some magic pill that's going to make it a lot easier. I just find that it helps, and I've found that it's very healthy for people to have those social touch points outside of the people that you work with, because you do need to have a work-life balance. But if the only people that you interact with are the ones that you work with, you have a work balance. And over time, it can be pretty rough. And you'll start defining yourself by the people that you hang out with. You'll start defining yourself by the uniform that you wear, the things that you do. And then one day, I don't care how young you are when you join, at some point in time, you're going to time out from the military. And you need to prepare yourself for that.
Throughout your career and even after your military career, you've had the opportunity to experience a lot of different countries and cultures, I imagine, firsthand. How have these experiences shaped your perspectives on the life and the world? One thing I will point out on TikTok, at least, is we can kind of see other places without going there. But I mean, I wish so many more of us got the opportunity to go out to different countries and see other cultures and see how people live. But how all those experiences kind of shaped you?
Yeah, largely is the short answer. We all do have that opportunity. I mean, what's crazy is you do the data on the percentage of U.S. citizens that actually have a passport, and it sits at about 20%. Like, okay,
oh wow,
that's
really
interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's an interesting. And then again, how many of them have a passport and they only use it to go to Canada or Mexico? Which I'm not saying don't do that, but it's an interesting worldview when you've never seen any of the world. And I've been all over the world, from first world all the way to, I don't think there is a category for fifth world, but let me just tell you, I've spent some time in places that would be fifth world. People talk about the U.S., we're free. We have all these freedoms. It's like, calm down, cowboy. There's a lot of first world countries that have a lot of the same freedoms that we do. Are they all the same? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But the more you travel to places, and I would recommend people travel through the first, second, and third world countries, it's amazing the context that you will get. You'll realize that a lot of the freedoms that Americans think only are in America are not. And then you'll realize a lot of the things that we take for granted in America are things that people would trade their right arm for to even have access to in the places that they live. I mean, it's crazy to see people complaining about, and I'm not saying there's not oppression in the United States and a diversity of economic statuses and, things that people are having to fight their way out of, but people complaining about oppression in the United States on their $1,000 cell phone while sucking down their $6 per 12-ounce latte compared to somebody who their month's salary might be $6 and they're trying to feed a family or just try to figure out where their next meal is coming from without running water, with electricity that comes from a wire hooked up to a car battery to a light bulb is the only light source that they have in their house, to even call it that. There's a lot of context that you are able to develop when you can see the distance between those two.
Okay, then my next quick question would be, if you had to pick 2 countries that you can stay in for a month, and you're not determining these countries based on safety or whatever, given all of your experiences, maybe the food, whatever it is, which 2 countries would you pick?
Well, what are you trying to get out of that experience would be my question.
Totally you, from what you've seen from your own personal experience. If you had to choose that you're going to live in country 1 for 30 days and then country 2 for 30 days, what would they be?
Are we trying to experience beauty, though, or are we trying to give people that context of what we have versus what others don't?
Oh, let's go with the latter, actually. So
okay, so if I really wanted to highlight the first world versus third world, I'm sure most people would expect me to point to Afghanistan or Iraq because of the time that I spent there. Go to Kenya. And so I spent some time there working for the strength and conditioning company. Not a lot of time, but about a week. We were building schools for a charitable initiative. And I watched a pregnant woman walk to the medical treatment facility, which I use that term in the broadest and lightest sense of the word. It was a building for sure, but we walked through it and got a tour of it. It was largely an empty building with somebody there who I have no idea their medical training or treatment ability, or how they got to that. So the woman walked there pregnant and left later in the day with her newborn child in a wheelbarrow, walking back home. Wow. The women's main job there still is gathering water. They carry it on their head, and we followed a group of these women to where they got the water. I would not wash my clothing in that water, let alone use it as the primary water source for my family. There are places in Kenya, obviously, that are more towards the first or second world, but don't spend your time in those places. Go spend your time where the majority of the population center is worried about not the next week, not the next month, the next quarter, the next year, but the next day. So that would be a good place to start. And I mean, like, it'd be dangerous for people, places like the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, quite a few African countries. I mean, the border region in between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Waziristan. There's just places where there is pure abject poverty and the absence of all of the luxuries that we take for granted. You spend 30 days there. You drop somebody in there for 30 days and you ask them to live like those people did. They will not come back to the United States with the same sense of what this country is.
Yeah. Wow. Yes. Moving on to my next question. SEALs are known for their mental toughness. I wanted to ask
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Fair enough. I wanted to ask you in that case, can you share any strategies or practices that helped you build resilience that we can go ahead and implement, that the listener can go ahead and implement in their daily life?
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. A lot of the skills when it comes to mental toughness are reinforced through physical pain. And it's not like, hey, put your hand out on a table and I'm going to smash your fingers with a sledgehammer. That would be an interesting test of mental toughness that I recommend absolutely nobody ever do. It's a lot of micro lessons that you could talk about in a broad perspective on a podcast, but it's not something that, I guess to a degree, somebody could implement them from hearing it on a podcast, but what you're missing is the physical reinforcement of that. And I think it needs to be both. When it comes to mental toughness, resilience is a term that's thrown around a bunch. The technical definition of or description of resilience is an object that can be bent from its original state and it returns to that original state, which I think is incomplete, because I think the goal from somebody trying to be resilient should be that ability to be bent, but you come back stronger. And that takes time. Because otherwise you're not moving the needle, right? You're like, oh, I got pushed and I came back. Well, how about I got pushed? I learned from what I got pushed. I learned how to deal with it and I came back stronger. That to me is true resilience. But how do you do that? How do you build yourself back stronger? It's not overnight. You use the analogy of going to the gym. If you go to the gym for a week, and you've never been to the gym before, the only thing you're going to get is sore because you've never pushed yourself in that way. But if you can stay for a month, you might start noticing some differences. If you can stay for 6 months and keep micro pushing yourself, you're going to start to see some more major differences. You stay for a year to 2 years and 3 years, that's where you see the macro differences. Special operations, or being a SEAL or special operations in general, it's a painful job, but they teach you how to focus on only what is important in the moment so you can get through that and then move on to the next thing that is the most important. And it's done through physical pain, and it's done through uncomfortableness, and it's done through asking you to do tasks in environments that can be dangerous with oversight. And I don't know how to replicate that in people's lives by just talking about it on a podcast, but that's kind of the baseline of where I think the mental toughness aspect comes from. Having said that, there is a bell curve to everything. There are people in the SEAL community that are incredibly mentally tough, but on every team, even the most high performing team, there's the top 10% and then there's a bottom 10%. So it's still just people at the end of the day.
And at what age you think we can start training it?
Resilience?
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be done at an age-appropriate level as soon as there is a capacity for the ability to communicate with the child. Just because a child is upset doesn't mean you have to throw an iPad in front of them. There are mechanisms, and I'm also saying don't starve your children of any soothing mechanisms either, right? Let's find a balance here. And we also don't need to be the Spartans and going, look at this child, it doesn't meet my physical standards, and go throw it off a cliff, which I'm not sure they actually did, but they did it in the movie 300, which as far as I'm concerned is a documentary.
Since we're speaking about the mental toughness, I would like to talk about the mental health and the military. So recently, the Army implemented the Brandon Act, where it allows soldiers to confidently seek help through their leaders, and it will charge leaders to quickly and connect soldiers with resources. In your view, what steps do the military need to take to continue supporting mental health for our service members?
I think it's good that they have a confidential approach to that for the situations that will require it. But I think the most impactful thing that the leadership could do is to seek help themselves or use those mechanisms in the open. Because I don't know about you guys, but the most influential people in my life, I watch what they do. I listen to what they say.
That's a good point.
And I see the impact that it has. So, and this is a change that I saw towards the tail end of my time in the SEAL community. I've been out now for over 10 years. But there was an emphasis, a groundswell of emphasis towards mental health. And they not only had, one, it's making sure that the mechanism is in place, right? So having those programs in place is a great thing, because if somebody comes to ask you for help and you're like, I don't know what to do, or you don't have a direction to point them, that's obviously problematic. So having them in place is one thing. But I think one of the most important things that we should continue to do, not only in the military, but also as just humans, is to continue to remove the stigma associated with seeking help for mental health. I've done it multiple times in my life. Some of the hardest things I've ever done in my life from a mental perspective had nothing to do with the military. Like the single hardest thing that I've ever done in my life was go through a 2-year divorce. I mean, that ruined me more than anything I ever did or was asked to do in the military. And I needed the help of other people who could prevent me from getting into very negative cycles of the way I was talking to myself, the way I was thinking about myself, the situation in general. I'm an expert at me, but I'm not an expert at what goes on between my ears. And there are people who have dedicated their entire lives and education and career to understanding those things. And having that available as an asset, I think, is essential. So it's good that they have the ability to do that confidentially. But I would say to the leaders, if you really want to lead by example.
That's great. That's really great advice. I like that.
What did you do? As you said, it was the toughest time, your 2-year divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us examples of what did you do to stay stable, mentally stable, and improve your resilience, let's say?
I chose not to deal with it in an isolated cave by myself. I think it's very easy, especially for men who I think the data is out on this. Largely, most men are less social creatures than women. Just the social hierarchy and the amount of even just words per day spoken for men is drastically lower than for women, which cool, it is what it is. But that also puts you into this place where if you're a challenging if you're being challenged with something, it might make you a little bit more likely to try to deal with things in isolation, which I have found to be very dangerous for myself. So I found somebody to talk with about my concerns, about how I was. And here's the thing: if you're going to talk with somebody, you have to be honest with them about how you're actually feeling. Otherwise, you're just looking in a mirror and telling yourself that you're awesome. Look at the work that I'm doing while not doing the work, which unfortunately can happen. But I found an objective person to try to be the sanity check for me, so I could bounce ideas off of them and I could get an objective thought from somebody who wasn't directly involved in the divorce itself, who didn't have a tie to my ex-wife, who could help ground me in a little bit more of an objective reality, because it was a very deeply emotional time in my life. And those are the times for all human beings where you make the worst decisions.
Did you do any exercises, like physical exercises, more than you do?
For me, well, and so this is one thing I've learned about myself as I've gotten older. My physical activity and my mental health are very intrinsically tied. I've just been, I'm not going to call I'm an aggressively average athlete, but I've always been busy doing things. It was, baseball and water polo in high school, the occupation that I had in the military, obviously very, very physical. Then I was working for a strength and conditioning company, and just, being physical and that outlet of just being able to break a sweat and just think about what you're doing as opposed to what you need to do or what's, crashing down on you in your life. Hugely important for me. Not that way for everybody. So I'm not saying that that's the key for anybody, but that was another thing. I've definitely noticed times in my life where, say I got like a minor injury, but I had to take time off of whatever activity I was doing. I noticed a dip in my mental health as well, or even just the way that I talk to myself. So I made sure that I stayed as active as I could.
I see. Okay, Andy, I have one last question to you. While we were going through the posts and interviews that you did, we noticed that you've expressed skepticism about the current political system. So in your view, what are the most significant flaws in the system?
I don't think that politics was ever designed to be a career. I don't think that the founding fathers and the framers of our governing documents thought that people would spend 50 plus years in politics. And I also don't think they thought the country was ever going to be the size that it was, which is, for how long ago as they wrote these documents, they're doing pretty good. They're definitely flawed, but they're doing pretty damn good.
Yeah.
However, there's no way that they could have thought of everything. And I think the biggest flaw that I see now is how long people can play in the pool. And I'm not even just talking about elective officials. This was something that was brought to my attention not too long ago, and I think it's worthy of discussion. There's the people that we vote for to go into office, and then there's these massive, massive groups of people that work in government as just employees or very influential people. So you'll have, say, a governor or senator's office, whatever it may be. Somebody new gets elected. They're from the other side of the aisle, or maybe they're even from the same side of the aisle, but 60, 70, 80% of the staff stays. But you get to a place where somebody who's been on that staff for 8 years, 12 years, 16 years, 20 years, 30 years, they're wielding as much power as the person that you elected into office. And we don't get to vote on those people.
Yeah.
And I just think that the pool, I think it's toxic. I really think that, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you can see people who have been in this occupation, which I don't believe it ever should have been. If you've been in there long enough, a lot of trends seem to peek their head up. Drastic increase in net worth on salaries that are $200,000. It's like, that's interesting. You have $150 million in the bank and you're getting paid $200,000 a year. That's weird. Your ability to pick stock exceeds that of every trader on the face of the planet. That's odd that so many of you are able to do that. I think we have to figure out a way to make it about service to the people that elected you into office as opposed to service to self. And we need to figure out a way to, think of a medication that you take from a doctor. Okay, we've identified this particular thing, this compound, vitamin, mineral, medication. It has a maximum dosage that if you go beyond that, it's going to start to have some complications potentially, right? We might start to have some negative side effects. So what do? We put a warning label on that. Doctors prescribe only up to a maximum level because they don't want to have those after effects that could come from an overprescription or overexposure to this toxic thing. But we don't do that with politics. They have access to information. They have access to influence. They have access to power. I think we can agree that too much of any of those things can change the way that human beings think. So let's just treat it like what it is. It's a toxic environment. That doesn't mean that you can't get effective work there done, but maybe we should limit the dose.
So we need to cut the government in half.
I don't know if cutting the government in half is necessarily the answer. I think that should be a great discussion on the table. Before we cut the government in half, I think we should have a very transparent conversation about where the money is actually going into the government and why it is the size that it is. And we just put it all up onto the table. Can we do better? Is the system working now? Where can we start trimming things away?
Andy, I have one final question for you, which is the question we ask all of our guests here at the end of the show, which is, who has been one of the most strongest or inspiring people in your life, and what lessons have you learned from them?
That's an easy one for me. It's been my dad. I won the lottery with my parents. My mom unfortunately passed back in 2010. But up until, that point of passing, and honestly, even just the memory of her and who she was, and I know who she would want me to be, it still governs who I am as a person. But they set my true north for me. And it's not ever something that I've even questioned deviating from. And, kind of the standards of communication between loving couples, communication, how to have a disagreement. My dad was a brick and stone mason. Not a physically easy job. And I started working with him at the age of 11. So I understood the value of hard work. I understood what you could get from hard work. I developed the concept of taking a really big task and chunking it down into smaller tasks to make it more digestible, to increase your odds of being successful in completing it. And fortunately, my dad is still around today. My episode, the podcast episode I released was with my own father. He went a little bit too far into the Scotch probably on that one, but he's a unique man for sure. Yeah. And, maybe he told more of the truth because of that. But the fact that I can sit down and have conversations with him, I really cherish it, because I know he's not going to be around one day. And the ability to go back and to look at those time capsules and to be able to hear his voice again, it'll be powerful for me. But that one for me is easy. It's my dad specifically, but both my parents.
Awesome. And judging from the comments, it looks like you'll definitely have to shoot another podcast with your dad, because your comments all want your dad for another episode.
Yeah, Andy, because he's out of his mind. He's clearly insane. And people are like, oh, that's awesome. I think that, but I don't ever say it. So maybe your dad can just go up there and talk for Saul.
It's going to be a separate series, speaking with the dad.
Here's the problem. Exactly. He would do that. Like, he would advocate for that. And then I don't want to commit to doing that. Every once in a while, let's just keep him. It's like, Dad, I love you, but we're going to keep you in your cage for a little bit.
Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.